Today's episode of Beyond the Loss has been sponsored by Allison Lang Real Estate with a heart. Care and knowledge to help people on their real estate journey. Please visit allisonlang.ca. We are so honored to have you join us for this episode of Beyond the Loss. I'm Aditi Leverage, and I am a bereaved parent to two and parent to one living child. I'm a specialized pregnancy and infant loss coach, mindfulness meditation teacher, and founder of the registered charity, the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center.
And I'm Danielle Kluski, bereaved parent to my daughter Emelina and parent to two living daughters. Co-founder and director of operations of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center. On this show, we share real stories about parenting and healing through pregnancy and infant loss. We allow space for the often silenced truths around loss to be heard. We offer an affirmative space for all people impacted by loss to share their stories, their triumphs, and their healing.
Please keep in mind that the stories shared are personal stories and are not to be used in replacement of professional advice. Should you need additional support, please visit our website in the show notes that are linked.
We are so excited to have you join us for today's episode. Let's start talking.
Welcome back to Beyond the Loss. Today, we are so excited to have 5 authors with us on this podcast episode. So this book that they are all co-authors in is called Don't Struggle in Silence, I Am Resilient, releasing on May 2nd, 2021. These incredible authors share their unique stories of their experience with pregnancy loss and their healing journeys. So Danielle and I are so excited to have all of you on with us. Can you please share with our listeners who you are? I will let maybe Michelle go first.
Thank you. So I am Michelle. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I am a mother, a wife, a bereaved parent as well. I am currently a doula and lactation program manager. And yeah, that is it.
Wouldn't say that is it. That's a lot. So, thank you. Amy, would you mind going second?
Hi, I'm Amy Lands. I am the mother to Ruthie Lou, who lived for 33 days in 2011. Since then, I have authored 6 books on pregnancy and infant loss, including Navigating the Unknown and Our Only Time. I'm a cancer survivor, founder of the Ruthie Lou Foundation, and a certified grief specialist, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. I guess I'll do Amy R. next.
Hey, thank you so much for having us all on here. So I am a wife and mother. I actually lost my daughter to Potter's syndrome 2016, so that's kind of what got me here. I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old, so I stay busy with them. I homeschool, and my husband is the youth pastor, so I am involved in that as well. And I kind of say that I'm all over the place doing a lot of different things. I also recently got a certificate in grief and bereavement, and so that's kind of my heart ever since losing our daughter. It just kind of sent me on a journey to hope and healing and helping other women do that. I mentor women at a local pregnancy center that have experienced pregnancy loss as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Aviva.
Hi, everyone. This is Aviva, and I'm dialing in from sunny Florida. I am a coach, a speaker, and a rapid transformational therapist, which is a new and upcoming thing. So I'm happy if anybody has questions, we can dive into that later. But most important of all, I am a mother of a delightful 6-year-old girl and 2 other babies that I hold very dearly in my heart.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least is Jazzy.
Hi, thank you for allowing us to be here. I am Jasmine. I am a mother. I go to school. I have a business, Hustle 52 Weeks, where we make clothes and face masks. Also, along with the Angel Mom, we make posters for that as well. My firstborn, Isaiah, I lost 12 years ago. And Ashley and I used to work together, so that's kind of how I got on this path with everything. I have two boys, 10 and 9. I'm losing track of how they are. But I am always on the go. And other than that, I'm in Phoenix. It's about to be hot. So I'm preparing for all of the heat.
Yes, and us Canadians are slightly jealous of that. It was snowing over the weekend here, so thank you all. Number one, so much for taking the time to chat with Danielle and I today. Number two, just being so honest and open and sharing your journeys so that you can hopefully provide hope and healing for others that are also experiencing this loss. So it sounds like every single one of you have experienced pregnancy and or infant loss. Can you tell me in your own words, whoever, and all the questions are thrown out to whoever would like to answer, what called you to contribute to this book that is coming out in May?
I can speak for myself that when Ashley sent out the request for submissions, I really felt called to not only share my story, which, I live every day, but also I am nearly 10 years from when my daughter was living, and I have a beautiful life now. And so my call to write and contribute to this book was because 10 years ago, I would have never been able to imagine that my life could be beautiful again. And it's really important for me to provide hope to other mothers, fathers, parents who are living in that place of helplessness and hopelessness, to show them that although it might feel unbelievable and unachievable at those early stages, that hope and healing is possible. And it's important for me to be able to offer that to them as I had others offer that to me in my early days of grief.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that when we're new in the journey, it can feel like it's never going to end. It's never going to get better. It feels quite hopeless. And sometimes people offer words that can sometimes be a little bit like Danielle and I, our last episode of the podcast was like toxic positivity, where it was like, don't allow yourself to go through this. But then, so I like that you're using this as a tool to say, like, 10 years later, I've gone through this. I sat in the heaviness of this, and now I can truthfully say that there is light somewhere along the journey. I love that. I think that's so important to be able to read other people's words and their triumphs in this journey. So thank you for that. Anybody else would like to share what called you to contribute to this book in particular?
I was just going to say that for me, my husband actually has a podcast, and he had Ashley on there, and she was a guest on his podcast, sharing her loss of her twins. And she just reached out about the book and said, hey, would your wife like to be a part of this book collaboration? And of course, I had wanted to share, get it out to the world, make a greater impact. And I love Ashley's heart in that she is about reaching more people so that they can find healing. And I'm the same way, and that was for me, that I had somebody that stood in the gap that was offering me hope, and I wouldn't be here without somebody else doing that. And so for me, it's just giving back to, hey, this is what worked for me. It may not work for you, but you're not alone in this. And I think that's so important, just having a community, because people may not have a community right where they're at, but they may have that community through a book or a neighbor or social media. And so I think it's just so important to have that community.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been doing this work now for about 6 years, and the community that I've found has just been incredible. And you're right? There's so many ways and so many pathways to connect to community. And I think a book is one of the most powerful ways, because when you're in the depths of grief and loss, and you don't want to connect in any other capacity, somebody else's words can really be your lifeline. So I really love that as well. So thank you, Amy. Amy R. I'm going to say Amy with 2 E's, because we've got Amy with 1 E and Amy with 2 E's. Aviva, I think you were gonna share.
Yeah. I am loving everything that I'm hearing from both our lovely Amy's here. And I wanted to actually also add a little bit of my different experience because and looking back and wondering why I didn't have as much support and community as, I know, to color me jealous a little bit here, but I wanted to collaborate and be a co-author on this book because Ashley and I have worked a little bit together, not a lot, but we are working more together, so to speak. And we have done podcast episodes together. And something that we always talked about was how this is such a taboo topic. In as much of a modern society as we all claim to live in, I am always amazed with how we don't talk about the really important things, and miscarriages and infant losses being one of those topics. So when I was presented the opportunity to spread my mission and my work and word on this topic, I immediately said yes. I did not think twice about it, so that I could offer help and support, knowing that when I was in the middle of it all, I did not have any help and support, and I didn't want that cycle to continue.
Yeah, powerful, powerful. I think, I feel like, this is a book, and yet it's so much more than a book.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Jasmine, Michelle, did you want to share what called each of you to this book?
Go ahead, Michelle.
For me, I echo a lot of the words that the Amy's and Aviva have shared. Also, me and Ashley, I always laugh about how we met. Clubhouse had rolled out and everyone was on Clubhouse, and I was like, all right, let's try Clubhouse just to get on there and see if there was a platform for anyone speaking about pregnancy and infant loss. And when I got on there, I kind of was scrolling through, adding different people and things like that. And I came across Ashley, and I was like, okay, let me add her. And one day, I think she started a room, and she was talking about, like, the title was like pregnancy loss. I was like, oh, okay, let me see, what she's talking about. And I got in there just to listen and to hear. But I was just so amazed, I guess, not just from her story, but there were other women in that group that shared. And I'm like, I was just excited to hear and see that even on a platform like Clubhouse, that women still wanted to be able to share that message of hope after experiencing a loss of pregnancy or infant loss. And so that kind of jump started the introduction for me. I think Ashley hosted like twice. And one time I was like, you know what, I'm going to share. And so I just shared my story of losing my firstborn at 19 weeks pregnant 11 years ago. So I shared my story. And after that, me and Ashley just kind of hit it off. And so it was just like we united over something so painful, but it's just been a beautiful journey, just being a part of this collaboration with all these women, being able to hear their stories. And just, I love being able to use other stories as a reference for other people that I do come across, because I am a pregnancy and infant loss advocate as well. And so being a doula program coordinator, we get those calls a lot that our clients, either the baby passed, or we just get a lot of those calls. So being able to have like a wealth of resources, like different stories from among these ladies and so many other connects that I've made, being able to say, I know, you're down right now, but here is someone that has went through something you have went through, and they've made it out. And not to say that, every day will be sunshine and rainbows, but just hold on to that piece of hope, and you can get to the other side of that as well. So that's kind of, how I became a part of this.
Good old Clubhouse. I have yet to go on there. I'm like, the TikTok and the Clubhouse, I'm like, am I too old to figure this out? But I feel like I need to start to dive into that. Amazing how these platforms, though, like even right now, right on Zoom, that we're all in different places and yet we're able to connect. I think that's one really powerful thing that COVID has done for us as a world, is that power of connection through different platforms. So very cool. Jasmine, I'll let you speak.
No problem. I got into this fully, I'd have to say within the last maybe year or two. I relocated from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I did a fresh start. And it was my first year away from my whole entire support system. All of my family was back in the Midwest, and 2019 was my son's 10-year anniversary of his birthday. And I was going through a mental breakdown. I couldn't function. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't stop crying. Couldn't do anything but go to sleep. And Ashley and I used to work together. So we were working together when I lost my son and she lost her twins. So we've been on this journey for about a total of about 15 years, close, roundabout, of knowing each other. But just speaking with her and talking about sharing my story with her, I started to know others that were going through these things. And once again, like we've all talked about, it's a taboo subject. It's not very widely known where people actually discuss their trials and hardships and how they got through to the other side. One minute you see them in grief and the next minute they're to the other side, but you don't see the bridge of how they got to the other side. And I've always been told that my story was so inspirational and I needed to share it, but I never thought that because, of course, I'm the one going through it. So that just kind of brought me to this moment to share this moment with all of these wonderful ladies and how we have went through the things that we went through. We went through the grief and the trial and the healing and how we got to the other side.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. And I know we want people to buy the book, so without giving too much away, and this question again is thrown out to each of you or to any of you who'd like to respond. But because I totally agree, Jasmine, with what you just said, is that we see the people that are in the grief, and then suddenly they're on the other side of it. Suddenly they're living with the grief and carrying that grief powerfully with them, and yet not enough people talk about that space in between. And so it sounds like this book does that. The question is, if you can give us one or two things, how did you get to the other side? And that's for anyone who'd like to answer.
Honestly, my son was my second pregnancy, but my first full-term pregnancy. So just growing up in society, it was always looked at as when you have a baby and you lose a child, that there may have been something wrong with the mother as to why the child didn't survive. So me personally, I was ashamed, embarrassed, didn't know how to really talk about it because I didn't really know many people that went through it. But learning how to deal with the grief and not be ashamed of my son's passing and celebrate his life. And I spoke about this on a podcast previously, but I celebrate 3 different days of my son's life. I celebrate the day he was born, which was February 20th of 2009. I celebrate the day that he passed, which was April 23rd, 2009. And then I celebrate the day that I laid him to rest, which is May 1st, 2009. So I celebrate all of those 3 days with balloon releases.
I think that for people who know me personally, they looked at my strength on the outside. They saw I showed up. I held my head high. I could be present physically in places where perhaps others might think I would have been unable to. What they didn't see was how hard it was to get out of bed, how taking a shower took considerable effort, how I didn't pick up the phone. And if you spoke to me on it, it's because you called me and I decided to answer. And so the things that really got me through that time were making really small goals. I had a time I had to get out of bed by noon. That was the rule in my house. I could lay there till noon, and by noon, the window shades got open. I needed to take a shower. And then the goals got a little bit larger. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to talk to a friend. I'm going to see the counselor. And that went on for quite some time until I realized that I had a little glimpse of joy again. I laughed at something. A song didn't make me cry. And those moments of joy became my focus. And after a few years, by that point I had had another child. He was born living. I was raising him. I became distracted in the day-to-day life, but I still felt like an outsider to many other people's lives who had living children. I didn't feel normal. And an opportunity came up to attend a retreat. And I felt like, well, I'm living life. I'm doing okay. I don't know that I really need this, but I felt very called to be there, similar to the way in which I felt called to contribute to this book. Didn't really know the outcome, but I had that like urge to be there. So I went to this retreat for other mothers who have lost children under the age of 1, whether in pregnancy or in infancy. And I walked in that room and I hadn't felt that moment of being seen for years. I made friends with these women. There were 18 at the retreat. I stay very closely connected to 8 of them. We get together every year, even though we are from across the world, including Canada and France. And I think the things that got me through this in those early days were those very small goals and the grace I gave myself. And then also my commitment to not give up on something more and to show up at that retreat where I felt I needed to be and the relationships that I acquired from being there. And, I think there's many different things that got us through this loss. And I think that all of us could probably come from a different perspective. But for me, that connection, community, and being seen really did soothe my soul. It really did allow me to heal and grow through this.
Amy, you gave me goosebumps because exactly what you were talking about is I kept nodding. You can't see me on podcast nod, but what you said had so much value. I remember the exact same moment where I had to make myself get out of bed at a certain time each day. And for me, that was I had to get up before my kid got home from school. And she got home off the bus at 2:00. So that meant that I had to be showered and eat something by 2:00. And it's right. It's those little moments where it was like weeks of that. And then one day it was like, oh, wait, I actually I feel like I can do this at an earlier time, or I can do this, or that they're that little pieces of joy. So thank you for sharing that, because for myself, it's been 9 years, and for a lot of us, it's been a long period. I had forgotten what that was like and how just having a shower was like a huge thing for me. And I know that many of our listeners, they're either in that moment right now or they were there too. And that's okay. Where we were is totally okay, because that's how we got to where we are now.
Right. And I want to clarify that I said, and then it was years. I wasn't in that place for years, but it wasn't until years later that I could see, wow, I've come so far. Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge we've come so far.
Yeah.
We survived. We're resilient. We're doing this.
Yeah, 100%. Because for me, it was weeks. But it's now that I'm 9 years out, I think about, sometimes I'm like, somebody had said to me last year, they said to me, wow, you've handled your grief so well. And I was like, you didn't see everything behind the closed door. You didn't see on anniversary 3 where I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. We only show what we can, right? And what we want to show. It's hard for us to share those like really deep moments, because I feel like anyway, society says it's year 1, it's year 2, you need to move on.
Right.
I wasn't ready to move on then.
And sometimes I feel like it's hard to share those moments because you're in them. Mm-hmm. And so, it's human nature to, when something's going really well, you want to celebrate and share that with people. And when it's devastating and life altering, you can hardly keep your head above water. So you're not in a position to then, from another point of view, share that with people. You're just trying to survive.
Yeah. And I think through that, I lost friends, because nobody understood that when you said I had to make a choice about whether I was picking up the phone or not. It was years of that. There are still days where I look at my phone and go, nope, can't do it. It's an off day, and I just turn my phone off. Aditi, I don't turn my phone off for you, but there are other people I turn my phone off because I'm not in the mind space. And it's less now than it was 9 years ago, but it still happens.
Amy, what you said, we are resilient, we're here, we survived. And I wanted to say that the title of the book is Don't Struggle in Silence, I Am Resilient. What does resilience mean as a bereaved parent to each of you?
For me, I would say that resilience is showing up, is giving yourself the grace. Like all of us, and Amy just said, there were days that you don't want to get up, and you can't do anything. Like, just for me, small decisions, basic things like, what are we eating for dinner tonight? I couldn't do even those things, and so just showing up and doing the next right thing, and being okay with not being okay, I think is a huge thing. That resiliency is just pushing forward, even when you're like, I have nothing else left to give. There's nothing left here, because I was in the place of, I'm done. I'm ready to wave my white flag and just let this take me over. Like, I don't want to go on anymore. But in those moments of being honest with how I was feeling, where I was at, kind of pushed me forward to make that choice of, what am I going to do next? I'm at a crossroads. I can either let this take me over, or I can push forward a little bit more. And going back to the last question, one is the grace, giving yourself grace to where you are, how you're feeling. And two, I'm strong in my faith. And so that really pushed me forward too. Again, having that community of, when I wasn't strong enough, I couldn't do it on my own, I had people that were lifting me up, that, I could reach out to them and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. And the people that I had, one of the ladies that helped me, she walked through it. She had lost a baby a year prior. And so she knew where I was. And so finding those type of people that can really relate to it. And that's why I love this group. I love the collaboration that, we get each other,
I want to say that resilience to me is living. A lot of times we compare where we've come in our grief to what someone else is doing. And it's very important for me to dispel the myth that you have to do anything grand in honor of your experience or your baby to show your love for them. I think that we show our love for them in the way that we show up for ourselves in life. And early on, I would say that I was living for my daughter. And somewhere along the way, that changed to living for myself. Now, of course, I still live for her, but my life is important too. And so for me, resilience is the way that we continue to live after something terrible has happened in our life. And that can be as a result of pregnancy or infant loss, or any other trauma or tragedy that's been endured. And it's not a race, a competition, a comparison. It is getting up each day and living your life and finding joy.
Yes, I fully agree with that. I love that, living for yourself, right? Because that is where your daughter continues to live. That's how her memory gets to be honored on a day-to-day basis. Jasmine, I think you were going to say something.
I was. Resilience for me is, I wholeheartedly agree with everyone on our discussion. But for me, is being okay with not always being okay. Sometimes we have to understand, especially when we're moms and we work and we have a whole life that still is going around. I know, me personally, I feel like I have to be superwoman all the time. So everything has to be done. I've got to fix it. I've got to do it. But in those moments where I'm not feeling it and I'm just having an off day, allowing myself to be and have an off day, but not stay there and dwell in that moment. Allowing myself to come out of that moment and realize, like Amy said, I'm living for me. And in order to live for me, I also live for my family. And just to keep moving forward. And honestly, like I said, celebrating my son's life, that it brings me so much joy just doing that. I didn't realize the power of celebrating your child, or celebrating with balloon releases and acknowledging their life in that moment and the joy that they brought. it has helped me move so much further in life and through my healing process.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Danielle and I know, obviously we run the charity and we get the privilege and the honor of hearing so many stories through the charity, through the podcast of people. And we know that healing, like Danielle said, she's 9 years out. I'm about 9 years out as well. Healing is an ongoing process, right? We are further onto the other side, but I don't know that we'll ever be fully arrived on that other side. And healing is a constant journey. And so I'm just wondering, for anyone again who'd like to answer, what has writing this book and sharing your story in this capacity, how has that furthered your healing?
I think for me, this was kind of like, because I have wrote a book before about my experience. And so when Ashley was like, okay, well, we need you to write again. And I was like, okay. But just when I sat down to write, I'm like, okay, I got this. But when I sat down to actually begin writing, it was like as if I was triggered all over again. So having to go through, and I talk about and I share my story and different all the time, but literally having to sit down in that moment and rewrite it again, it did something for me. Like it triggered me, and not in a bad way. Like it triggered me. Like clearly there's stuff there, and to me it'll always be there because we lost, our child. And so for me it was like, okay, take a moment, sit in that. And I think that this writing process literally just, gave me a moment to just stop, pause with being a busy mom, busy wife, busy everything, and just sit in that for a moment, in those feelings and those emotions, and just process it. Rather that was me crying, calling Ashley, whatever that looked like. It was just like, okay, allow yourself to sit in this so that I am able to effectively share this story in the way in which I want it to be told. But it literally was like reliving it. A part of it was like reliving it all over again. And for me, after I get through that and work through that, then I'm able to take a deep breath and say, like after it, like I'm inspired. Like, okay, now let's keep going. Go share that story. Go tell someone about your experience. I solely believe like our experiences are not for ourselves. I truly believe that they really are for others, like to be able to share with others. And so that's what this writing process, like literally, it was cleansing for me throughout this process.
I agree with that, Michelle. I actually, because I do mentoring, so I talk about it all the time, like share my story, share my experience, pour out my heart, all of those things. But when I sat down to write, and I had journaled, that was another thing that helped me. I journaled it was kind of my way of getting it out in those moments where I was by myself. And so I went back and read, all of my journals, and it was like you said, reliving it all. And it took me right back to that place. And I was just like, wow, like that's what it's kind of like you forget just how heavy and hard it was and how broken, and then it's like I just was reading my journals and writing, kind of taking myself back to that place. And it kind of helped me to write and really get it out. Like, hey, I just want you to know this is where I was. And it wasn't easy. Sometimes, like we've discussed, people may have viewed it as being easy, but you weren't here, So I second that it's just it is a heal. It's part of this book has been part of the healing process. And I'm so thankful for it to be able to get it out. And, I would just recommend to anybody listening that if you don't have somebody to talk to, sometimes getting it out of your head is helpful and just writing it down. So, I would just recommend journaling. And that's a way to go back also and look at the progress you have made, even if it's just like 3 months later and you see where you used to be to where you are now.
The books that I have previously written were all fiction, self-help, grief books, pretty practical books in regards to loss and healing. This is the first time in a book that I've told my story or part of my story. And I really appreciate the opportunity in doing so. I have every intention at some point in my life to write my daughter's story because I want others to know it, and I want it in a tangible place for her two brothers, my sons, to have as a memoir to their sister. But I haven't put it all down in a published piece yet. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to do that. And not only in a way where I was telling her story, but also her story that extended beyond her life. Because even though she's no longer living, her story continues to, and it impacts our daily living. So having the opportunity to write that, it really meant a lot to me. And I'm looking forward to seeing it printed on the pages in my hands.
And I'll echo everything that everybody has already said. This is Aviva, by the way, just because I know you don't have faces, but I too have shared my story so many times, but writing it was definitely a lot more challenging than I thought it was going to be. For the past year and a half, coming up to be 2 years now, this summer will make it 2 years, I have been working with women as a coach and helping women to get to the other side after having a miscarriage or multiple miscarriages. And what the other side looks like is completely open for interpretation, because I think the other side, like you said, it never is a destination that we get to. It's always evolving, it's changing as we are changing and growing through our life journey. But that's what I've been doing day in and day out. And in my coaching and speaking opportunities that I also go for, I have shared my story so many times. So I really thought that this was going to be fairly easy, but it was not. It was not easy at all. And I had to pull the tools and the techniques that I teach my clients, and I had to, in a way, relive not just the painful times, but relive how I came to discover the tools and the techniques that I now teach, because it took me a long time and a lot of resources and events and hiring all kinds of people. And when I was going through it, there were no coaches specifically to help women in these experiences. I'm so thankful that today this is becoming a bit more of a topic that people have some level of awareness around. But I had to just pull out all those tools from the shelf and utilize them all over again. Things like making sure I'm asking myself the right questions. And I really believe, and you can, if you were to have one of my clients in a conversation, that's the first thing they'll tell you is, I really believe that asking yourself the right question is the number one thing anybody should do in any challenging situation. People often think about the what and the how, like what should I do or how should I do it? But I really believe that everything should start with why. Why am I doing whatever it is that I'm doing? And I had to keep reminding myself of my why behind why I said yes to writing my chapter in the book. I had to keep reminding myself that life's happening for me, not to me. So I had to coach myself all over again in this writing process. And it's been a journey of so much growth and development and just soul searching, although you would think that there wasn't anything left with this particular topic just because I felt that I'm in a better place. And I am, but it was definitely through that review process, there was a lot of reliving as well. So I had to coach myself all over again.
I definitely agree with everyone on here. For me personally, writing was just a tad bit different because I had shared my story verbally with family and those that knew of the situation as I was going through it in the different moments over the years. But I had never actually sat down and wrote about the whole situation and everything that had transpired from beginning to end. the in-betweens, the hiccups, and everything that went along with it. And for me, going back after I did my final draft and rereading what I was putting into the book and everything that I had wrote about it was I I was taken back. Like, wow, I really went through this. Like, this was really real. And I agree, it definitely put me back in that moment. It definitely triggered me. I actually, when I got done, I left, got off work, and went and sat on the mountain and just looked at the scenery. That was my like security blanket, and I'm like, okay, we're doing this. Like, we're actually moving forward with this. So yeah, for me, it was just a reflection of everything that I had went through and seeing the words on paper, and it was different from actually verbally just telling someone.
Yes, writing can be, it's such a vulnerable process once it's out there. I mean, that's your truth. That's your story. It's such a vulnerable experience. And I think what everybody here said, right, is you had to allow yourself to go back into that darkness if you wanted to be able to authentically provide the space of light and hope for other people. I don't think we can really do that if we don't allow ourselves to actually go back to those places. So I love that it continued to offer each of you, it sounds like, healing, and Aviva, pulling your tools that you use for others. I think that's powerful. I think that's what makes this group who are here and can say, I am resilient and I survive, is knowing that it is a constant going back into that place and utilizing these tools and then coming out and then going back in and coming back out. I think that's an important piece when we talk about healing, is that it's not linear and we are going to have to do that work. So I think it's just so beautiful. I honor each of you and your stories and your courage and your bravery for showing up in this space of this book and sharing so authentically your stories. I mean, I think it's such a gift whenever I read or I'm talking to someone and they share that story. I think it's such a gift to the people that are able to read it or listen to it. And I thank you for sharing pieces of that and yourselves and your children's legacies with us today on the podcast. I want to ask Danielle if Danielle has any questions before we ask our final question that we ask all of our guests.
No, I just wanted to, I guess what I want to say is thank you, each one of you, for sharing your story. It really, where we are in our stories is not necessarily new, but I love hearing the stories of over the last 10 years and kind of where those pieces have come and how the writing and how we have had triggers, and sometimes they're good triggers and sometimes they're not so great triggers, and just how willing everybody has been to share those. So I just want to thank you, because I know that I 5 years ago was hoping that somebody would tell me that I wasn't crazy, because I would be doing something and then I would just start crying and I had no idea why. Or I'd be writing because somebody had asked me to write an article for work about pregnancy loss and I would be upset and I couldn't figure out why. So thank you all for sharing your stories and how you've kind of walked through that path this last bit.
So we ask this question of all of our guests, and so if all of you want to share, or some of you want to share, if you could tell yourself something that you wish you would have known then that you now know, what would that be?
For me, it would not be so hard on myself. I took it very, very hard. I felt like because I wasn't there with him at that very moment, that it was my fault. So I blame myself, and I blamed myself for a very long time. And it took probably close to 10 years for me to stop blaming myself and come to the realization that it could have happened even if I was there. And would anything have been differently, you know? And just knowing that, allowing myself to the okay to say, hey, I'm in a bad space. I'm not okay, but I'm going to get through this. That's the biggest thing.
I think for me, I'd say, and I say it a lot, that no one ever suggested to me counseling, therapy, anything of that nature. No one ever suggested that to me. And now, since I've been on this journey, I'm always asking, because I know therapy and counseling isn't for everyone, but at least they know they have choices when they are seeking, the healing, the understanding, and trying to process that grief. So I make sure that if I was able to tell me back then, I would say at least look into counseling and therapy to see if it can help you in your journey. Again, no one ever, and I'm still appalled to this day that it's been all these years and really no one ever said, have you talked to someone? Do you want to talk to someone, or do you need to talk to someone? No one ever said those words to me. And I believe that I could have benefited from that. And so I always just encourage other people, if they're interested, even if they're not, just offering as a suggestion for them to be able to process their grief.
I agree with that, Michelle. I think that was monumental in my healing, is that I did reach out for help, because I knew, like, this is too much for me. I can't do it alone. And I would also just say that just remind yourself it's not always going to be this way. This is not the end of the story. Just knowing that there is more. There is another side to this thing, and you can get through. It may not feel like it in the moment, because I know there were many times that I didn't feel like that. But knowing that, if you just remind yourself, this is not the end. There's more coming. And being able to connect to even like this book and our stories, seeing somebody else on the other side is like, it gave me hope. Like, if God can do it for them, he can do it for me too, and just holding on to that, even when you don't feel it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. This is Aviva again. If there was one thing I could go back in time and tell myself, which eventually I learned, but I wish I could have learned it sooner, was that it's okay to raise your hand and ask for help, whether that's reaching out to whatever sense of community you have, because community could be the physical community around you. It could be your family, friends. It could be maybe some friends that you really connect with on social media. It could be therapy, counseling, but it's completely okay to raise your hand. In fact, it's more than okay. It's encouraged that you raise your hand and you ask for help. And if I could go back in time, I would do all the things that I've been doing over the last couple of years, and it has helped me reach so many insights and light bulb moments, because I got to a place where it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. With every miscarriage, I was so worried about history repeating itself that eventually it led to a point where we weren't even conceiving. I was so focused on, if we conceive, what if we lose the baby again? And eventually that fear got so strong. And I think the body and the mind are connected so deeply in such an amazing way. And I kept giving myself all the wrong ideas, not knowing that the outcome would be infertility, but always thinking to myself that if this happens one more time, this is it. I'm never going to make it a third time. And I think eventually my mind and my body picked up on the fact that for me to survive, I need to stay away from another pregnancy. And eventually when I got to the realization of how my fears were preventing me from having another healthy, successful pregnancy, I owe all of that success to the therapy sessions that I went for, specifically the rapid transformation therapy. And that is truly what got me to make this not just a career for myself. When I talk about hypnotherapy and rapid transformational therapy, it's because I am a living, breathing success story. And I can see how there were years of fears and negative beliefs, both on my end as well as my husband, that was adding to the challenges that grew and grew and grew. So if I could go back in time, I would first of all raise my hand sooner and be like, hey, I need some help. And that would help me to also realize that a delay is not a denial. Because in that moment, I saw myself as somebody who was being punished, somebody who was being rejected. In reality, that is not what was happening. It was a delay. And that's the one message that I give everybody, is that a delay is not a denial.
I love that. A delay is not a denial. I really love that. And Amy Lands, if you would like to share.
If I could go back and talk to myself 10 years ago, the thing that I would absolutely tell myself is that I will be okay. I couldn't see the end, and I didn't believe the end existed. And I mean the end being out of the depths of grief. As we know, this is now ingrained in our souls and part of our everyday living, but I needed to know that I wouldn't be sinking in the amount of pain that I was in the beginning, and that there could be a life worth living on the other side. And so if I could go back, I would say, you can do this. You are strong. You are resilient. I know it's not going to be easy, but you will survive, and it will be worth it. And I really feel nearly 10 years later that that is absolutely true. Life is still good. Just looks very different than I imagined.
Yes. And on that note, I want to say again, thank you so much for being here, for sharing pieces of your story today on the podcast and your stories in the book. The book, again, is called Don't Struggle in Silence, I Am Resilient. It is coming out May 2nd, 2021, which is Bereaved Mother's Day. Can one of you tell our listeners where they can find the book when it does get released? Does anybody know?
The book can be pre-ordered through any of the authors before, if you find us on our websites or social media. And once the book is released, it will be listed on Amazon and on Ashley Pittman's website.
Yes, and we will be having Ashley on at some point. Ashley Pittman is the publisher for the book, so look out for that. We'll have that in our show notes as well. We wish you lots of success with the release. We will, of course, get our copies as well. Thank you all so much for being here. If you are in the depths of grief, which all of us have kind of spoken to today, get yourself the book. Know that you're not alone. Also reach out on the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Helpline. It's a national tech support line for Canada and the United States. We also have the number and the web chat information in our show notes. So you are not alone. And as the book says, don't struggle in silence. You are resilient. You may not feel like that in this very moment, but we can attest that it does come. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.